Hey everybody, welcome to the NPTE Podcast. This is Dr. Will Crane, your host, joined by Mark Stevens, physical therapist. And
hello.
Welcome to everyone who's listening. This is our first episode that we're running out about the NPTE, and we've been teaching about the NPTE for almost a decade now, and we've decided that it's time that we start disseminating some of the NPTE secrets. We'll be giving away those secrets.
Don't give away the secrets. Not in the first episode.
We'll use that as a teaser. The NPTE secret is ... You got to stay tuned. So we're going to be giving away all of the NPTE secrets as we go through. We'll be talking about today. We'll be going through the basics of the exam, what you need to know to navigate the actual exam day. And then in future episodes, not only will we be talking test strategy, but we'll be talking a lot of test content. So a lot of episodes, you're not going to want to miss any of them. We'll have these posted both to our website as well as our social media. So be sure to check us out on social media, whether that's on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, ptfinalexam.com, all sorts of ways.
We have it all.
That's right. We are everywhere. So Mark, take us away.
All right. So we're going to talk about the NPTE basics. So what are people wanting? What is the exam about? What is on the exam? And so we'll start off. I'm just going to ask Will a few questions here. So Will, tell us a bit about the exam itself. So pretty much what exactly is on the NPTE?
Great question. So the exam, it's, as anyone who's listening to this, you already know that this is the entry-level examination in order to enter into the field of physical therapy in the United States. And so whether you're trained in the U.S. or trained outside the U.S., everyone has to pass this National Physical Therapy examination in order to enter practice in the U.S. So the purpose of it is to make sure that we are safe and effective practitioners of physical therapy in the United States. And so therefore, we are tasked with having an entry-level knowledge of the field of physical therapy. Now, what does that mean, entry-level? It means that what would a typical physical therapist encounter within the first 12 months of practice? So it doesn't mean you have to be an expert in the field of dry needling or an expert in nerve conduction velocity testing. It doesn't mean you have to be an expert in any one particular thing, but a general practitioner of physical therapy. And then that's combined with being up to date or current on the content that is currently being taught in CAPTE accredited universities across the United States. And so typically this is material that has been published within the last 5 years in core textbooks, not necessarily research articles. And that trips people up a little bit too, is that sometimes they think, oh, there was this one article I read about that. Not necessarily the case. On the exam, they will be testing you on what is in the core PT textbooks published within the last 5 years, with the exception of like Kendall and some of the classic physical therapy literature about range of motion and joint mobilizations, but pretty much everything else is up within the last 5 years.
Right. So this is actually one of those big questions that people ask a lot is, how should I be studying? What should I be studying from? So are you saying that core textbooks, that's the thing to go for, not review books, not, like you mentioned, articles, not those things. It's the core textbooks that we used in school. Is that what you're saying?
That's right. So that is where the test is written from. Like having done this for, like I said, nearly a decade, I've had a lot of students who have asked over the past, they say rumors that they've heard, they hear that the test is written from the review books in one way or another. And that's simply not the case. The test is written directly from core PT textbooks like McGee, O'Sullivan, Dutton, all those core PT textbooks. That's where they have to have a direct citation for every question that's on the exam. So therefore, if you're ever in doubt on a specific topic, make sure that you are back into the literature, into the textbooks, so that you can be solid on that content. The review books are great, absolutely awesome for just that quick reminder, but they are not a replacement of actually learning it in the first place from the textbooks.
Right. So you've got thousands of dollars of textbooks in your basement. Use them.
That's right. They're more than just, I mean, you could use them as a chair. I think they stack up quite nicely as a chair.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So the test, and this is a good segue into the development of the test. And so, as I mentioned, every test question has to come from chapter and verse quotation from a PT textbook. So they're not just making this stuff up. But the test is written, it's actually created, the first drafts of every question are created by volunteer item writers across the country. FSBPT does workshops not only in Virginia, but also across the US, where they take volunteer PT item writers. They come together, they put together the first drafts of all the questions. Then those questions are then edited, analyzed, and really vetted through about 8 different subcommittees over the course of nearly 2 years before they become what they say good enough or qualified to roll out onto a test. And so it's important to remember that it's not just a couple of guys in Alexandria, Virginia, in the FSBPT offices who are just throwing together the hardest questions they can. It's actually your peers who are creating the questions for you. And then they are, again, they're edited at least 8 on 8 different subcommittees, and then they're even rolled out as a pre-test item. So on exam day, 50 of the items that you'll encounter are what they call pre-test items, where the FSBPT is actually testing the psychometric properties of the question to make sure that they are valid and good questions. And so this is where there's a little bit of will advice here for you. A lot of people get really worked up. So if they've had a failed NPT attempt, and I don't want to discount the emotions that go into that, but a lot of times those emotions get turned into lots of angst and anger towards the questions or towards the creation of the test, when really you should try to channel that emotional energy back into showing the test who's boss, to show them that you really do know your stuff and that you are willing to put in the effort to become a content expert on physical therapy content. And so I guess bottom line is that rather than get mad at the test, focus that energy into your studies, being in control of how, where, when, and the quality of your studies. You'll find that you have a much better balanced test approach than if you're just sitting and stewing over how much you dislike the FSBPT.
Right. And I agree with that. Because one of the kind of things that people say are when you're looking at some of the test questions and they're saying, that one was a test question, or that one was a pre-test question, that one's not going to count, or that one's not going to count. We don't know which question on the test is a question that is a pre-test question and which question is a question that's actually going to go towards your final score. So it's really important to try not to be, while you're going through and just thinking, well, that's going to be a practice one and that's not going to be one that's going to actually count. Because the fact that it's gone through all of the stages it's gone through to even get to a point where they'll put it in front of you shows that it's going to be a relatively good question, and you're not going to be able to pick out a test question versus a real question. So take them all as real questions.
Yep, good advice. Because they space those throughout the entire exam form, there's no way to identify which one is a pre-test item and not scored, and others that are true test items and are scored. And so just to talk a little bit about the actual format of the exam on exam day. So on exam day, you can expect 250 questions, 50 of which are the pre-test items. So only 200 of the items are scored. And so each of these exam forms contains 200 scored items. And on any given test day, there are multiple forms of the exam throughout the United States. And this is just something to prevent cheating, so that if you were sitting in the test center right next to your buddy who is taking the NPT, you would be taking the same test, but an entirely different form of the test. Meaning that, if you saw 7 questions on pediatrics about this and you got out and you talked to your buddy, which you're not supposed to, but if you did talk to your buddy and say, hey, there were 7 questions on pediatrics that totally stumped me, and he's going to be scratching his head like, I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't see those. And so then he's going to get all nervous because he didn't see the pediatric questions. And so it gets into this kind of wild territory where you think one saw one and one didn't. Anyway, bottom line is there are multiple forms of the exam on exam day. So therefore, don't get too hung up if one of your buddies says they saw something or they were really thrown off by something else. Chances are they took an entirely different form of the exam than you did. And so each of these 200 items, so you get this 200 block of questions, 250 total. In each of, I'm going to advance to the next slide. Those of you who are watching this on YouTube, you'll be able to see all this. And just a little plug for our YouTube channel. Check out PT Final Exam on YouTube. So the 250 items are divided into 5 sections. So you have 5 sections of 50 questions each. Now remember, 50 of these are pre-test items, but they are spaced out randomly throughout the entire exam. So therefore, you can expect 10 pre-test items on every section of the test. But again, you can't distinguish them from any of the other questions. So therefore, just answer every question as if it was the real deal. You are given a scheduled break after section 2. So this means that the clock stops for 15 minutes while this is really just a bathroom break. So at the end of section 2, you can go hit the bathroom, get a quick drink of water. You're not allowed to access exam-related material during that time. So really, it's not a study time. It's nothing more than just a quick bathroom break, stand up, stretch your legs, and get back into the test.
But make sure you take it. Take the 15.
Take the 15.
Because sitting there for 5 hours looking at a screen without taking that break is just killer. So you want to make sure that you take that break, get your eyes away from the computer screen, get a stretch, get a drink, go to the bathroom, and get back in there and do it. But take the break. It's given to you. It doesn't come out of your time.
Right. So the clock stops for 15 minutes. It means that nothing occurs until you come back and sign back in again. Although if you take a 20-minute break, the clock automatically starts up again at 15. So just 15 minutes is all you got. Quick bathroom break, take the stretch and get out. Now, you are allowed to take what are called unscheduled breaks between any of the other sections. This is simply the emergency bathroom break that's available to you. So if between section 4 and 5, you really got to hit the baño, you just, you don't push pause. You have to submit the section. You essentially clock out and say, yes, I'm going on a break right now, but the clock does not stop. So every moment you're out of your seat is a moment taken away from your test. So typically, most people don't use these. It's really just the emergency bathroom break.
Because it's kind of broken down as well. So if you break it down, how long do you get per question, Will, in the breakdown?
So for the total 250 questions on the test, you're allowed 5 hours, which comes out to about 1 hour per section or 72 seconds per item.
So if you take an unscheduled bathroom break, you're going to be reducing that to maybe 65 seconds a question or something like that. So get good at practicing how long a question takes you. Get good at knowing how long 72 seconds is, because it's really, really helpful when you're going through in how long you are taking to answer a question, to making sure you're staying on track for that full hour.
And so this is a question I get all the time is, okay, so Will, you said that it averages about 1 hour per section. There's 5 sections, 250 questions, 5 hours. You're supposed to average about 1 hour per section or 72 seconds per item. Does that mean I must finish each section within 1 hour or the time expires? And that's not correct. You have a 5-hour block of time to use as you wish for those 5 sections. And so therefore, it is entirely possible that you could spend 4 hours and 59 minutes on 4 sections and 1 minute on the last section, although I do not recommend that.
That's bad planning.
That would be bad planning. So therefore, pace yourself about 1 hour per section. That's usually how I do things, because, I mean, you can see the clock, you can see the timer rolling, but in my mind, I don't try to do the 72-second math. Rather, I'm just looking at the global 1 hour per section target. All right, so navigating through the questions, you are allowed to strike through. So on each question, you get the stem of the question, which is the text of the question, and then you have 4 answer options that are distinct from one another. There are no all of the aboves, none of the aboves, some of the aboves, nothing like that. All distinct answer options. You are allowed to, or they give you the option to strike through answer options. And again, this is just for your ease of navigation in the test. You can strike through the options. You can strike through some of the options, all of the options, none of the options. It doesn't really matter. It's just for your convenience. And then you're also allowed to mark questions as desired. And so this just means that, again, it has no bearing on your score. They don't track this. It's just if you feel like you need an extra few minutes on a question, you would mark it. Always put down an answer, mark it, go through the rest of that section, and then you can come back within that section. You cannot return to previous sections. So each section has 50 questions. You must submit and complete those 50, never to be seen again, and you can only navigate within 50 questions at a time.
Yeah, I really like the strike through feature, because the less information I have to look at, the better. So I was always with tests. I've always been one of these people that can read a question, narrow it down to two answers, and then I get stuck on those two. So it's really helpful having that strike through is if I can go down and I'm narrowing my options down to those two questions. If I strike through the ones that I know are incorrect, then I can just focus on those two that I'm working between. If I can strike through three, then obviously I've got the right answer. So which is one of the secrets, right, Will, is to just get the right answer.
Well, I tease that it's like playing basketball. You'll win every basketball game if you'll just score more points than the other team, right?
Right.
I don't know why people make this so complicated. So you'll always pass the test if you answer every question right.
Always.
Ooh, dang it. Did I give away the secret?
So yeah, the strike through options and the marking options are great. What you don't want to do with the marking options is mark too many options. Be very, very selective on questions that you're marking, because you don't want to go through and have marked 42 of the 50 questions, because there's no way you're going to review that. And if you do come back to a question that you've marked previously, don't change your answer unless you are 1,000% sure that you're changing to the correct answer. So if you've put your guess, you will talk yourself out of it if you spend too long staring at that question. So if you mark something and come back to it, don't change your answer unless you're 1,000% sure, and use the strike through to get rid of some information that isn't going to confuse you.
Is it even possible to be 1,000% of anything?
No.
No. Okay.
But actually, my son was talking about percentages the other day, and he was talking to me. He actually got 460% on a test, he said.
Oh, wow.
And so I asked him how many percent the test was out of, and he said it was out of 440, which was fun. And then he's only 7, but it was interesting because I asked him if the test was about percentages, and he said no.
Okay, that's
which
good.
was
good.
Which was good that he's not like really confused on the percentages. But yeah, it's not possible to get 1,000%, but maybe 100%.
But if you feel, maybe you can feel 1,000%.
I think you can feel 1,000%.
Yeah, why not? On the test, just another navigation aid. They give you a scratch pad or a dry erase pad, where they're essentially laminated pieces of paper, and you get this dry erase marker, and you can jot down notes as you go through the test. A lot of people use this as what's called a brain dump, where when you get into the test, you just jot down a few things that you are worried you'll forget. So for instance, if you want to jot down like the acronym for the cranial nerves, or if you are worried about remembering what different shoulder tests are, you may just jot those down real quick. Again, it has no bearing on your score. You can't take anything in or out besides what's in your head, but it is an option that some people really like to use, the brain dump. And I remember when I took the NPTE, I did that. I think I jotted down the cranial nerve. The irony is that by preparing what you'll put on the brain dump, you don't actually need it because it's already locked in your mind. So It really becomes a psychological security blanket that is just a kind of a warm fuzzy that helps you feel better during the test, which improves performance.
Yep. That's the key. If you can go in and be confident and you can be happy with that, then it's really good. Now, when I did my brain dump, I put things on my brain dump that always took me a little bit of extra time to work out. So cranial nerves were on there. I drew the brachial plexus. I had some myotomes on there. And then if I had any question, myotomes were great because if I had any questions on spinal cord injuries or I had anything musculoskeletal wise that I was trying to work out, I could quick reference and be kind of look at it and say, all right, C7. All right, I've got wrist flexion, I've got elbow extension, and I knew it right there and then without having to rack my brain to go through that. And it made the question flow a little bit faster for me. So those tricky things that takes a little bit of time to dig through your brain to find the answer, those are really helpful to be on your brain dump. The one thing I want to mention on that brain dump and on that scrap piece of paper is that certain prometric centers can be a little bit fussy with how you utilize that. There have been lots of students that we've worked with who have used it on a previous, who are taking the test for a second time or a third time, say that I was trying to do my brain dump before my time started. So in that preparation time, and Prometric stopped me from doing it, and it threw me off. I lost my flow. So what Prometrics say is that you have to write your brain dump during the actual timed portion of the exam. There are some centers that are maybe a little bit more lenient, and they might let you write some stuff down, but don't be alarmed if you start writing stuff down, that they will say, no, you can't write on that scrap piece of paper until your official timer starts. So that's one of those additional things that can just raise anxiety in someone within the first 5 minutes of their exam, is that their plan to get the brain dump down all of a sudden didn't happen. Their timer starts, and now they think they're going to waste a bunch of time writing their brain dump out. So just be aware that you might have to do that during your actual scheduled time. But if you're writing things that are going to save you time answering questions, it's worth taking 2-3 minutes at the beginning to do it.
Right. And that's the key, brevity. You don't want to be writing a 5-paragraph essay on that brain dump. I mean, maybe you do, but it takes a long time. I was just talking to my wife last night about how much I disliked writing 5-paragraph essays. Like, it just takes too long. All right. So everyone asks, we get this question a lot. Okay, so what's up with the scoring deal? Like, I know that we have to get a 600 out of 800 scale score in order to pass the test. But what in the world does a 600 scale score mean? And then they start doing some quick math. They say, okay, well, there's 200 items scored, so therefore 800 possible, which means every question is worth 4 points. And they start doing this math, which is, it's not far off from the truth, but the real truth is that because there are so many forms of the exam available on exam day, which you don't get to choose, it's automatically assigned to you. Because there are different forms of the exam, there are some slight inherent differences between them. And so the scale score allows FSBPT to grade it's not like grading on a curve, but it grades each form equally, so that if you were to have taken any other form, you would get the exact same score. That's the idea.
So does that mean some of the questions are weighted differently, or is it just the fact that it's just scaled based on what it's saying there from one form to the next form?
Essentially, it's so if let's say on one particular exam, you had to score 150 items correct in order to pass it. However, another form was slightly more difficult. They would make it so that the 600 mark was equivalent with 145 questions correct. And so it's not so much that each question has a different weight, but it's that think of it like a high jump bar. The high jump bar is slightly different based on the difficulty of that particular exam form. And remember, these are slight differences. It's not like, okay, one exam form is just going to give you a haymaker across the face, whereas another exam form will be like a marshmallow walk. I don't know. What is a marshmallow walk? I'm not sure.
I don't know. It sounds fun, though.
It sounds very soft and cushy. It's not like that. It's just to account for the slight variations between exam forms. Now, just a little bit of practical note here. The 600 out of 800 scale score has been hovering right near the 137 to 139 questions correct mark. And so therefore that really, you can see that translates to about 68%, 67, 68%, kind of depending on the exam form. Again, back to the big secret of the NPT is you need to target as high of a score as possible, but recognize that the actual passing mark is somewhere right around 139 questions correct.
Yeah, and that always raises a little bit of anxiety with people, especially on practice tests when they're kind of hovering that 65% up to 70%. Am I ready to take the test? Am I at a good spot? So as Will said, the higher score you can get on your practice test, the better. But this is kind of what we see, is that 137 to 139, 65 to 67% is usually a good spot. But we want to be focusing, trying to get above 70. If you can get above 70, then you're in a really good spot. You can go into that exam feeling very confident that what you're going to do on exam day is pass the test.
That's right. The higher above 70 you can target, the better, the more strength you'll have going into the better, stronger position you'll be going into exam day. And then this is a question I get all the time is it the same for every state? So the Federation of State Boards of Physical Therapy, or FSBPT, I think back in the 80s, it used to be different for each state. You'd have one score required in one state than a different state or whatever. That is not the case at all. Every state requires the same 600 out of 800 mark. So therefore, don't listen to any rumors that say, oh, well, it's the test is easier in Delaware than it is in Michigan or whatever. Not the case. It is the same test with the same scoring and the same properties in any testing center for any state in the union. Wherever it is you're taking it, it'll be the same deal. And this is just a little side note. Let's say that you are graduating from school and this happened, I have an anecdote here. This happened in the state of Idaho. So in Idaho State University, which is one of the nearest universities to me, their PT program, there are so few Prometric centers in the Pocatello area that one of the participants actually had to fly to Missouri to go take to find a Prometric seat for test day. So therefore, the bottom line is that even though this person was taking the NPTE in Missouri, so she had graduated in Idaho, had taken the test in Missouri, and was going to practice, I think, in Wyoming or Oregon or someplace. It didn't matter one bit where she was sitting for the test. It was the same test, same everything, just in a different location.
Right. So the exam, national exam, it's the same. The difference you'll have is with your jurisprudence test.
Yes,
so that differs state to state. So someone will have a slightly more difficult jurisprudence test than someone else based on the state you're working in. But if you are trying to get licensed in a different state after you've got one license, say you've got a license in Michigan, like myself, and then I actually went to get a license in Colorado as well. I didn't have to take the test again. I just had to provide my score. So you can get a license anywhere in the country based on this exam. You just have to work with the state licensing authority to get your license transferred over and pay more money, obviously.
And pay a fee.
Because that's what it's all about.
No matter what you do,
a few different people. Yeah. So the licensing, so the FSBPT, everyone.
Right. It's all about the fees. I mean, no matter what you do, you write a check.
Yeah.
Anyway, just one last point here about exam scoring. There is no penalty for guessing. And so this is different than some standardized tests that are out there. There is no penalty for guessing, meaning that you can essentially, you could guess your way through the entire test and you'd probably get a 25%, you'd have a 25% likelihood of answering every question correct, but there's no penalty. You don't get any negative points for answering a question incorrectly. That is a myth, or that does not exist.
It's good.
All right, so let's just polish off here with a couple of the myths that I've heard over the years, and Mark, you've heard these too. One of the big myths that I get is that the test is harder. So these are myths. The test is harder in July and easier in January, and that is false. The test is the test no matter where you're taking it or when you're taking it. The reason this myth exists is because there are more people taking it in July by nature of just the sheer volume of students taking the NPT. You will have more people failing the test. And so therefore they'd say, oh, well, more people fail the July test than fail the January test. So therefore that must mean July is harder. And that's not the case. It's simply just the volume of students that are coming through in July and October as compared to January and April. Let's see.
Yep.
So
because with the test, because there's 5 to 10 different options. How long do the tests go for before they're taken away? How long do they stay in cycle?
So each question is only used once or twice before it's retired forever. So,
okay. So, but they use them throughout. Could be anything. It could be in July. It could be in January. Could be in October. So the form of the exam is only going to be used a couple times, but it's still going to be the same kind of question. So and the way it's vetted and the way it's done, it would be very difficult to make the exam easier in January than it would be in July.
Right. So it's a total myth. Another reason this myth exists is because people equate the scale score with a curved score. So if you recall back in college, a lot of classes had tests or grades that were graded on a curve, meaning that the bottom 25% of people failed and the top 75% of people passed, regardless of the score. Like I had a biology class that was like this, where the highest score from the brightest student in the class, I think he scored a 52% on one of our tests. It was an awful test, absolutely awful. And the best performer scored a 52%. But it didn't mean, so that meant everyone else was like in the 40s, 30% correct. I mean, what an awful performance. But most of us passed the class because he graded on a curve, meaning that 25% of people failed and 75% of people passed the class. That is not the case. A scale score is not a curved score. The scale score is simply like the high jump bar, where if you can achieve above that 600 mark, you will pass. And so in theory, if 100% of students achieved a 600 or greater, 100% of students would pass. And in fact, the current statistics published on FSBPT show that I believe 90% of US trained PTs pass on their first attempt. And I think it's 28%.
It's lower than that. I think
it's
down to like 23, 24 for foreign trained.
So foreign trained PTs only pass on only 23% pass on their first attempt. Now that's not ultimate pass rates, but that's first time pass rate.
And it's not because we're not as smart as you Americans.
That's right.
Or you can believe whatever
Mark?
You can believe whatever you want.
So Mark, you were trained in Liverpool. Why is it that foreign trained students would have maybe a bit harder of a time on the NPT than US trained?
The difficulty for foreign trained PTs is we're usually approaching the exam at a different phase of our career. We've often trained in our home country. I trained in England at Liverpool, and I worked in Liverpool once I graduated. So then once I decided to come out to America, my wife is from Grand Rapids, Michigan. So we came out here and had to go through the process of transferring my license, and therefore I had to sit the boards exam. But it's one of those where I'm not taking the exam straight out of school. I've actually started to specialize in a certain area. So I've maybe worked in cardio, and I've done this, and I'm really, really good at cardio, but I've forgotten absolutely everything about pediatrics. And actually jumping back in and trying to review 3 years of school to sit the exam. And often foreign trained PTs don't think your exam is going to be as difficult as it is. So we'll take a shot at it because we're like, we're smart, we've passed school, and we take a shot at the exam and realize, wow, that was a lot more difficult than I was expecting it to be. And that is then when we jump in a little bit more and realize some of these myths and some of the structure of the NPTE, which has been really helpful to do first time you took it.
Right. And so it's, as you said, it's not because we're any better trained or have any brighter minds, but at the different stage of career. Like I've have students who have practiced for 10, 20 years in their home countries before coming and taking the NPT, which means that they've had 20 years to forget all of that great PT school training. They've specialized into one niche in the practice. Anyway, so it behooves anyone, especially foreign trained physical therapists, to get into an appropriate course like what we do at PT Final Exam, where we help train you not only on the content of the exam, but the structure of the exam and the strategies. Plus, same goes for US trained PTs. I mentioned that the statistic is that 90% pass on their first attempt, which means that 10% don't pass on their first attempt. So if you're in a class of 40, you'll look around and you'll say, dang, 4 of us are not likely to pass our first attempt. And so therefore, it again behooves you to get the appropriate coursework in play so that you don't miss out on your first attempt on the NPT.
Right. If you can plan, if you can have a really good setup and a really good preparation for the exam days becomes much less anxiety filled because you know you've prepped well, you know you're going to go in and smash the NPT. So that is what a prep class like what we do at PT Final Exam does.
Right. And as I just told this to a group of students not too long ago, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. So therefore, just plan. Do not fail to plan. All right. So
Good.
moving on down the last couple of myths we've got here. Score of 800 out of 800 does not mean you answered every question correctly. What it means is that the FSBPT no longer cares. It's about 92% correct, and you'll get that 800 mark, which is simply just saying that, we were really concerned about the 600 mark, and everything above that is just gravy. And so once you get to 92%, they frankly don't care. And so this is again, gives light to the myth that every question is worth 4 points. And so therefore, if I scored a 596, that means I only missed it by one question. Not necessarily the case. They like to zoom in on that 600 mark to make sure that every person that is passing or jumping above that 600 mark is actually passing. Another myth that comes up is that there are multiple correct answers to every question. This is, again, a source of great frustration for students, where they'll look at it and they'll say, I can narrow it down to 2, but then how do I choose which one is the most correct answer? And so the first step is to recognize, just mentally say, all right, there is only one correct answer, and it's my job to find that one, rather than sit there and get mad at the question and say, there are 2 correct answers. And I remember doing that on my test, coming out and saying, it was arbitrary. How could they do that? And it's not worth it. If you just go in with the mindset that there is the most correct answer, I need to find it, it'll take a lot of stress out of exam day. So just the last 2 things here. One is that we already kind of addressed this. The FSBPT is out of touch with reality. So again, this comes back to the emotional energy of the exam. The FSBPT, the people writing these questions are your peers. And so I guess you can get mad at your peers, but essentially you take that emotional energy and channel it towards passing the test and controlling all of your studies to make them super high quality, rather than sitting and grumbling about the FSBPT. And I know I talk about that a lot, but if you can change your mindset about how you approach it, you will find that the stress levels go down, your performance goes up, and you won't have to deal with it but one time, and then you'll be done. And then the final point here is that the test is purely academic. So there's this weird thing going around that's like, okay, so the test is purely clinical, so therefore none of your academic training has anything to do with the test. And then there's the other side is like, no, it's an academic test where it's all about what you learned in the textbooks and not what you learned in the clinic. The truth is somewhere in the middle, that they want to know, can you take the information that you have learned, you've gathered over 3 years, and you practiced in all of your clinicals, can you take that and apply that to clinical cases that they will present to you on the test? So just imagine like each question was a standalone case, and you have to answer it to decide what is the safest, most effective way to practice your physical therapy. And if you go into it with the mindset, okay, I need the textbook answer to this kind of a case, again, you'll have a lot less frustration. If you think about what would Susan B. O'Sullivan do in this case, rather than look at it and say, well, I had that weird patient last summer that had these weird presentations, and they lived on a 3rd floor apartment and had a wound on the top of their head. I mean, you can get into these crazy rabbit holes of seeing the anomalies, rather than just looking at what would the textbook tell me to do in this case.
Right. Yep. And I think some of the things that I struggle with sometimes is adding stuff to the question when I'm doing those kind of things. So I would like, I had a patient that had that once, but they had this, this, and this, and they also had this. And then I would be like, so I did this, this, and this, but that's not what the question asked me. So making sure you're reading what's in the question. There's nothing that's in the question, or there's nothing hidden in the question. So if it's part of the question, it's in there. Don't add stuff to it.
Yeah, a classic example is pain. Sometimes we read into it like, this person had, a partial meniscectomy, and then asks what would be one of the interventions be. And so you start thinking to yourself, I had that one case where that guy was super sore and painful after his partial meniscectomy. So therefore, my first job is to treat the pain. And my advice is that it's not inherent in the question that this person has pain. So therefore, only treat the pain if it is mentioned and it's inhibiting treatment, rather than trying to project this pain onto this patient that doesn't necessarily exist. And that's where people get into trouble, reading too much into the question and starting to project or to fabricate things that are not necessarily a part of that case.
Right.
Nice. Well, we've gone through all the myths. Mark, let's see. Anything else you want to add about any of these things before we sign off?
I don't think so.
Awesome. We've given away some of the secrets. We've got more secrets to come as we go through the NPTE podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll have lots more of the next episode. And I think our next episode will be talking about musculoskeletal cases. So be sure to tune in then. We'll talk about examination, evaluation, differential diagnosis, and intervention. And
it'll be a good one.
Until then, stay strong. Will Crane fist bumps all around.
All right.
Peace out. Have a great day.
Yep.